Thank you. Good evening. I'm Dr. Robert Schaap, Superintendent of Schools, Mamaroneck. Thank you for joining us for this evening's middle school town hall, our panel discussion. In a moment, I'll have the opportunity to introduce our panelists. I want to thank the many parents who submitted questions earlier today for our panel conversation. And we plan to frame the evening or our conversation around three main topics: update on end of year activities. We're going to kind of spend a little bit of time just talking about transition planning for the remainder of June and planning for ahead. And then we want to focus in on lessons learned from remote learning and the road ahead, road forward, and really address what's on the minds of our parents. I would like to take the opportunity to introduce our panelists here this evening. We have Board of Ed President Paul Bulova joining us, Assistant Superintendent for Student Support Services, Dr. Norma Mazzoni, Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum Instruction, Annie Ward. We have Hommocks Principal, Ms. Emily Macias Kaplan, Assistant Principals, Rob Andrews, Margaret Groniger, Irene Iannuzzi, and Guidance Counselor, Tim Nelson as well. So thank you all for joining us. I want to mention that it is our hope to organize in the coming weeks grade level parent I'd say question and answer or forums so that parents can have the opportunity within a grade to just ask specific questions about life ahead at Hommocks or anything that's on their mind. So thank you. Before we officially begin our conversation, I want to mention that maybe Annie, you can touch on it. We're in the process of organizing a parent survey to distribute in the weeks ahead. And our hope is to seek parent feedback, input on remote learning, really targeting our households. That is to understand that some families have a child in a particular level of school and some are across the system. So maybe Annie, you just want to give a headline on that?
Sure. Yeah. Good evening, everyone. So a group of us have been meeting about this and looking to send out this parent survey, as Bob mentions, sometime I would say within the next 2 weeks. And what we're trying to figure out is the right level of detail of the questions, recognizing that there is such a thing as survey fatigue, but how do we recognize that people might want to give varying amounts of feedback, also recognizing that the experiences, if in families that have multiple kids, that one child's experience, as we've heard from many parents, may be very different from another child's experience. So it might be difficult. We do plan to send out the survey, as Bob said, by household and have boxes to click in terms of at what levels, elementary, middle, high, families have students, and that would generate the appropriate questions at that level. But I think we're working out the idea that some people may actually choose to submit multiple surveys if they want to give different feedback child by child, but also to have sort of a branching opportunity that we're able to capture data efficiently, but then give people that want to go into more depth and detail the opportunity to do that. So that'll be forthcoming probably within the next 10 days or so. That survey will be sent electronically to each household in both English and Spanish.
Thank you, Annie. And we certainly welcome parent feedback and want to find an opportunity that we can, in some ways, communicate what was shared with us from parents across the system. Maybe we can take a moment to start the discussion. And Emily, I'm wondering if you can just give us an update on the end of year activities in Hommocks that are planned and well underway.
Great, thank you, and good evening to everybody. I want to just take a moment to just thank all of the parents out there. Especially over the past couple of weeks, we've been talking a lot about the car caravan. It's something that I think will be a lasting impression at Hommocks for many years. We want to say thank you. We know that connections that we make with our middle schoolers is at the top of our priorities at Hommocks. And the car caravan was just really a beautiful example of our community coming together. So yes, Bob, we have a number of tasks that we're working on to prepare for the transition into next year. One of the big ones that we're working on is the schedule. We're working on building the 2020-21 school year schedule. And to really support us in that effort, we've asked our counselors to meet with our 5th grade teachers across the district And we've also held several conversations with our elementary admin teams to really get to know students virtually and by talking to principals so that we have an idea of how to best support our incoming students when they join us in the fall.
So Tim, if I can just ask Emily, building on that, Tim, from your perspective, what does that look like from a guidance counselor's view of transition?
Yeah, it's the time of the year that we're spending a lot of time typically in elementary schools and meeting the kids and meeting the parents and the teachers. So this is a bit of a new experience for all of us. But at this point, it's been pretty much on par with what we've done in the past with elementary teachers getting information on each and every kid. We have, Zoom scheduled this week with all the elementary teachers, the 5th grade teachers, to get all that really useful information so that we can move ahead with teaming and getting all of our 6th graders placed in the right places. And from there, we're going to be doing more. We have a few weeks left of the school year. We have some more opportunities to reach out virtually to the 5th graders, kind of in lieu of our visits to the elementary schools. And we're really trying to get creative with this and find different ways to be visual to them. Not being able to see their counselors, not be able to see inside the school building is different, obviously, and it's not ideal. But we're going to be creative with it. And I think we've got some good ideas, ready to roll for the next couple of weeks.
Thank you. Emily, just give you a chance to continue.
Yeah.
I was just going to say very quickly too, I just want to give Tim some real credit for stepping into the guidance coordinator role this year. And he's leading his department through this pandemic by connecting the dots between not only our elementary teachers, but also Claire Reinhardt in the accountability office so that we have the best possible data about our kids. So our guidance counselors and really our whole team is grateful to have Tim in that role now. Sorry, Emily.
Thank you. And Nora, you raised your hand, so I want to give you airtime.
Yeah, I'm doing old school. That's how I've been running my mini. So too comfortable for me, quite honestly. So I was just going to add that the other thing that Hommocks has done a beautiful job on as far as kids with, disabilities, actually the articulation started back in December. So in December, 5th and 6th grade special education teachers were meeting. The 5th grade teachers came and actually toured at Hommocks, went through the different kinds of programs, talked to their colleagues about what worked, how it worked for this child a year prior. So at this point, when we got to CSEs, where Hommocks and elementary staff have come together, we're pretty much right in sync as well, to Tim's point, where we would be in any year. The difference, I think, now is when we think about re-entering school in whatever fashion that means, what do we need to do differently so kids can engage earlier and feel more acclimated since they can't be in the environment? But special ed and the guidance department works so closely with the Hommocks administration.
Thank you. Go ahead, Emily.
And well, thank you. And Tim, you alluded to the orientation work that we need to do with our incoming students. And although nothing can really compare and really substitute the live presence of being there in front of our students, we have put together a virtual orientation for parents and for students. Actually, we did it with the focus in mind that students would want to be part of, listening to the information that we had to share with families. So if you are interested, the orientation and the virtual tour is available on our Hommocks webpage. So that is something that already was sent out to 5th grade families, but it's on our webpage if you need to go back to enter and preview again. In addition, and Nora, you mentioned the conversations that we're having with our special ed teachers and parents. We're currently working on 504 meetings and CSE meetings. In addition to that, I know our special ed department will be working on articulation meetings so that teachers have all the information they need before receiving students in the fall.
Thank you.
Last Thursday, we opened up the school to parents. So parents are, we have our 8th grade parents coming in now. They're coming in to clean out their child's locker and their PE lockers. So we have a schedule set out for all students and for all parents to come in throughout the next couple of weeks. So that is something that we're currently working on right now.
Great. And maybe finally, 8th grade graduation?
Yeah, so our graduation committee is working hard on developing a program for our 8th graders. What we want is for students to feel special and to feel celebrated. The honk out is something that we're all looking forward to. The date for that is June 16th, so we're all looking forward to that. And I would say lastly, you know, Dr. Secchi has already been working with us, and we are working on scheduling time for him to meet with different groups of teachers from our staff. So these
Thank
are
you.
all
And
things that we're doing to really prepare for the transition.
thank you. And I want to take this opportunity just to thank you, Emily, for your leadership, for your guidance of Hommocks, and certainly for your presence and care of our students, families, and staff as well. So I appreciate that, and especially around the transition planning with Dr. Saki as well. But we do certainly want to honor your leadership and commitment to Hommocks and to our school district. So thank you. Just if I can transition to now thinking about remote learning and some of the questions that came in earlier today. And this, maybe we can have our Hommocks administrative team touch on the first question. What do we believe is most successful during the remote learning period? And in addition to that, what areas need additional attention or consideration as we think about remote learning moving forward? So I don't know, Margaret, Minnie, Rob, Emily, any
Sure.
thoughts coming to mind?
I can start. I mean, we've overused the metaphor of building the plane in the air, but you know, on March 13th, when we left the building, most of us thought a few weeks, maybe a month, we can do this. We got up and running really, really quickly, remotely, but the paradigm shifted immediately, and teachers were on a new frontier. You know, luckily, thanks to the district, we had Google and Google Classroom. We had that infrastructure, but it was difficult. You know, we had the teachers, as time went on, had to reimagine what teaching looks like. And we know that teachers are explorers, but they're also planners. So, you know, they were constantly readjusting, and we've been in contact with the teachers that we supervise and with the entire faculty throughout this, and know that, you know, that the learning curve has been really, really steep, but that they're continually adjusting and learning from their students. We're learning from parents. We're gathering as much information as we can as we go through this to make sure that that I can see it. Just even, I supervise the English department, just week by week, how things have changed as they got more and more feedback and experience with students.
Could you give an example of how, from your perspective, things have changed within the English department? For example, moves by teachers or shifts that kind of came out organically through the process of kind of testing out this new platform?
Sure. Well, one thing that teachers do, English teachers do a lot of, is give feedback on writing. And they had to, you know, all of a sudden they're not in front of students. So where they would run a writer's workshop in their classroom and be able to check in on students and have students work with each other and give each other feedback. I think at first they struggled with ways to do that. And they wanted to collect a lot of writing from kids. You know, low stakes and high stakes writing, and give them feedback. So a lot of teachers, they work together to find different ways to give feedback quickly. And again, you know, that I'm not going to say that we've perfected that, but several teachers have been using, they've found different platforms to give voice comments. Actually, I have a 7th grader, and he delighted in getting his essay back and hearing his teacher's voice as she went through his essay and gave him wonderful feedback, constructive feedback on his draft before he finished it. And another way that they're Flipgrid, a lot of our teachers are using Flipgrid. They had in the past. It's a way for teachers to, for kids to record short videos and then to share it with each other and to respond to each other's videos. And the English teachers are finding that it's another way for students to demonstrate their learning and their thinking as they're writing and generating ideas, and that a teacher can see 100 1-minute videos and assess their learning that way. So I think, you know, that's been a lot of their focus, is how do I keep in touch with my students? I have 100 or 110 students. How am I giving them meaningful feedback? How am I assessing how they're doing in ways that, you know, when they were in the classroom, they could do that easily.
And Rob and Minnie, I know that the administrative team is auditing Google Classrooms on a day-to-day basis, looking at consistency around instruction. From your work with science and math and social studies and other departments, what have you noticed around what's going well in remote learning?
Yeah, I mean, I can start. I think the first thing that I just want to acknowledge, and I really wish we could see all of the parents out on the other side of the screen, so to speak, because what teachers have reported in our many, many conversations with them, are that parents are partners more than ever. And I kind of wanted to just acknowledge I'm in that situation at home with a 6th grader and a 4th grader, that you're also preparing food and going to the grocery store and keeping your kids occupied, and really thank you for doing that, because it's provided our team the opportunity to learn about remote learning as we've designed it and supported it. I supervise the science department, and what we've seen in 6th and 7th grade are wonderful examples of teachers being creative and simulating some of the lab experiences that they do in the classroom at home. Whereas, for instance, if a student had, needed the materials to build a roller coaster that we have at Hommocks, that teachers have adapted their lesson plans and their projects for kids to meet the standards that those projects speak to. And I if I could say anything and communicate anything, is the excitement that teachers express, certainly to me, and I know to my colleagues, that they are feeling actually really creative. I think it's a struggle for them, and I think they would say that it's been a hard road, but they are experiencing incredible moments of sort of creative breakthroughs. And I can give you a specific example in 8th grade, where, typically and on an annual basis, we look at the regions as an indicator for proficiency and success. But what I would say is that, a high score on the regions is really just an indicator that standards have been met. And our new standards, our next generation science standards that we're really calibrating our curriculum towards, are almost better met through project-based learning. So our 8th grade team has reinvented learning through remote sort of pathways and ask kids to do a local geographical history. And so what that should look like at home is a slideshow with photographs from backyards and photographs of how the light is hitting the trees in their communities, and creating an earthquake archive. So I'd say actually on some level, we have a lot to build on moving into next year, because teachers have really been able to talk about standards with kids and talk about inquiry in science. So on my end, I would say that teachers are creative and sort of excited and asking for professional development over the summer. And the last thing I'll say is they miss your kids so much. That's the first thing that they say is, I miss seeing their faces in my classroom.
Thank you, Rob. And Minnie, would you like to just add your perspective on remote learning at Hommocks?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'll kind of talk a little bit about the math department. In math, I think some of the really positive things that have come out of remote learning are actually collaboration. Interestingly enough, this has actually forced them to kind of see the beauty in more collaboration. Not that they didn't collaborate before, but really increasing their efficiency, idea sharing, and just really just staying in touch with each other so that they are all on pace with the same curriculum. And that's been really nice to see that cohesion across teams in the math department. I would say another thing to congratulate, and I'm going to echo.
I think we have problems with Minnie.
We have a frozen.
They've come up with not only creative ways to reach kids. I think many of the math teachers were first.
Okay, Okay, well, I apologize. We seem to be having challenges, Minnie. I'll let you finish up now if you can.
Oh, sure. Oh, my connection is unstable. Okay. Yeah, just being creative about ways to connect to kids. That's been definitely a plus. Also, I've seen an outgrowth in terms of projects, also project-based learning. So we've seen a lot more hands-on application type of not just assessments, but just really like fun things that they've had to apply math concepts such as collecting data, creating data tables from it, analyzing statistical measures, finding the surface area of real world objects, doing a social distancing project around surface area. So there's been lots of really cool, innovative stuff. And I just hope that we can build on that and just, keep going with the positivity that's happening.
Thank you. So adding to it, Andy, if I can ask you, in terms of where we need to focus additional attention, when you think about from vantage point, not only Hommocks, but just overall and remote learning, what comes to mind in terms of the priorities for additional attention and focus and capacity building? Oh.
We're all getting better at these skills. Yeah, I mean, there's so many. It's really interesting because when I flip back through my notebooks and I go back to the first week of March, right, as we were gearing up for this, we were embarking, we were entering a tunnel where we had absolutely no idea of what was going to lie on the other side. We had no idea what the length of the tunnel was, et cetera. So I think that that as you've heard from this panel, we're so proud of the ways that teachers and families really, we had no choice, of course, other than to embrace it and to move forward. But that explorer spirit that Margaret describes, I think is what I've really been seeing. And with that, of course, have come some inevitable dead ends or have come some rough patches. I mean, we've certainly learned certain things that have been more or less effective than other things. But I think what you're hearing from this panel is that the phase that we're in right now is really taking stock of best practice, of what is it. We have a parallel survey to the survey that the families are going to take. We have a parallel survey for faculty underway to actually try to figure out what have they individually and collectively, and therefore what have we learned about pedagogical moves, about tech-based platforms that are more or less effective. And we've been doing that as we've gone. I would say there's been a pretty robust feedback loop at all three levels where teachers that have hit upon something that seems to be practical and efficient and robust and yielding good results, how can we then spread that and try to make that more systemic? And that's where we've been very well resourced by at the middle school, our department chairs, our leaders in each discipline, as well as our tech coach, Mike Sammartano, supports the secondary level, Jesse Dancy at the elementary level. So we've tried to be as nimble as possible, that if somebody finds something that, that is working, how do we make that more systemic? And that the structures that we have in place of department meetings, of grade level department meetings, team meetings, those things we've moved into the digital environment. And so we, those routines and those structures actually enable us to do that. I would say that one of the rough patches that we hit this spring, and then I'll defer to the team to comment more specifically, but the feedback that I think Bob and Nora and Paul that we've heard loud and clear was a perception between phase 1 of remote learning and phase 2, that there was a perception that that when we went to the AB schedule, that the workload really diminished. And that there was a perception from parents that kids were moving very quickly through what had been assigned and that kids were capable of and ready for a lot more. And so I think we retooled, and there was a lot of clarification and iteration of that. But I think that going forward, if we anticipate, as we do, that remote learning or some hybrid model needs to be part of our, one of our 3 scenarios for next fall, is how do we work together to develop some sense of, I guess we could say, best practice. So we've heard loud and clear from families that they want for their children to be really productively engaged across the day. And that seems very reasonable, especially when families are, we have working parents, we have first responders, essential workers, we have, we all know what our daily realities are like. So that we hear that message loud and clear. But at the same time, we grapple with what we know to be pedagogically or developmentally appropriate. So the idea of kids being literally on their computers the way we are right now in live synchronous learning across the day, which is a request that we have heard from many sectors. Is that in fact desirable? Is that appropriate? Is that actually practical or possible? So I think that this business that we're in right now of hearing from teachers, of hearing from families, where do we see the pockets where people seem to feel universal sense of value? And I'll just give you one example. Small group synchronous sessions. And by small group, we could say the size of our group right now, right? We're going to be able over the course of this time to hear from each of our panelists. If I were Bob's our facilitator, if he were really trying to get a handle on each of us over the course of this session, he'd probably be able to do that. So that becomes a challenge at the secondary level where teachers' overall caseloads are in the 100 to 125 kids. But I think one of the things that we're seeing is there's really a lot of traction, both socially, emotionally, and academically, from opportunities for teachers and kids to be engaged in these small group synchronous settings. I would say more so than whole group synchronous, although there certainly is a place for that in our plan. So I would just emphasize that we're learning as we go. We are benefiting from our explorers and our early adopters. We're trying to then plow those practices back in front of the rest of the team to really share what's working well. And that we're going to really use the data that's forthcoming from teacher surveys, parent surveys, and student feedback, which is really, our kids are incredibly thoughtful and articulate about the conditions that are more or less conducive to their learning. So how we incorporate that student voice as well.
Yeah, I mean, I can add just from my many conversations with teachers and our colleagues, the children, there are certainly children who have even to a certain measure thrived in remote learning. And one of the questions we've all been asking ourselves is, who are those kids and what are the qualities that make this work for them? And teachers report that kids who have an internal sense of routine, kids who tend to be sort of organized and self-advocating. Now, and I'm looking at Tim, those are the very skills that we work in middle school to teach. That this is the point, the transition point between elementary and high school, where kids are learning a lot of those executive functioning skills that we need to sort of shore up. So one thing that we're learning is how to build those skills remotely. And I think our office hours that teachers have been engaging in once we started our synchronous practices have given low stakes opportunities to say, hey, you didn't do that assignment. What do you need from me? So we're seeing real success from some students who were struggling perhaps to finish work on time.
So
work that the counselors are doing to follow up. So some of the things that parents might not see is sort of the behind the scenes work that is going on throughout the onset of remote learning. And one of those things is really the counselors being sort of the in-between person between teachers and parents and students. And so there's been a lot of follow-up that's been done with individual students, groups of students, to really support their work throughout distance learning. And I can foresee that being a necessity as we move forward in September as well.
Thank you. And so when we think about end of year assessments, and I know that as the state had announced that they were canceling the regions and state testing, this is actually a two-part kind of question. One, what is planned for cumulative or end of year assessments across our subject areas? And two, and Nora, maybe you can talk about this as well, when we think about students returning and assessing where they're at, the starting point, and the challenges there, how we're looking both at the academic measures of progress and readiness, as well as social emotional meeting the needs as well. So one is more straightforward. What is planned for the next few weeks to say, how do we assess the year that was? And then how do we look forward and understand the needs and anticipate that as a starting point for the fall? Rob, I
assume Hommocks is going to start. No,
okay.
Yeah, I can certainly jump in. So in talking to our 8th grade Regents Earth Science teachers, if you were to ask them what their biggest concern is, it's that kids are ready to hit the ground running in high school. There's been, so I would say, a great deal of formative assessment, and how that happens is teachers used Google Forms, I would say sporadically while kids were in the building, but Google Forms has been a really powerful tool to give kids formative assessments and quizzes. And I'll just give a simple example. If there were 3 standards you were testing and you used Google Forms, you would put that form on your Google Classroom, and every kid in your classes would answer it. And then immediately you'd have data about who answered it correctly and who answered it incorrectly for each standard. So the teachers that have been doing this set up their small group work to respond to those data points. So we're really seeing data-driven instruction in a formative sense. The Earth Science teachers do intend to create a cumulative assessment similar to the Regents. There's a large bank of Regents from past years to draw from. But I think if you were to ask any of them, they're very concerned about kids being able to enter into high school with agency and with confidence that they have the content down.
Thank you. And Minnie, just math in terms of thinking about mathematics as well, just end of year assessments, or what is the overall departmental philosophy at this point?
Yeah, so, math teachers love to give assessments. So that has not dwindled during distance learning really at all. So, I think the first few weeks, teachers were less, gung-ho about giving assessments. But once we knew that this was kind of going to be for the long haul, they've been using, same as science, they've been using Google Forms, exit tickets, quizzes, and assessments as well, and some type of mock assessment to the, like a Regents exam to kind of assess where kids are at. But I think, also in terms of next year, one of the things that we're planning is to have some diagnostic assessments when kids come in to truly find out where some of the learning gaps may be so that they can start building their curriculum to address those areas that we know will need some work and some extra support in the fall.
Maybe that's a nice segue, Nora, just to talk about your thinking around preparing for the fall and just how we provide and support students in not only academic areas, but social and emotional world.
Sure, and I'll kind of talk inside and outside of special education because that's most appropriate in this sense. But I do want to just step back and just connect to something that the team was talking about when we asked, what have we learned about remote learning? When we talk about students with disabilities, wow. I think that the barriers towards accessing instruction are so deep and complex when you add a disability on top of what's a new environment in general. And so, in special education, it's almost like there's 3 layers of learning. You have the general education teacher that's learning a new method of instruction, and then a special ed teacher coming in who's trying to learn and adapt and modify and clarify. And then you've got a student who's learning. So those 3 levels of learning take so much, it's such a toolbox because you almost have to learn how to negotiate synchronous and asynchronous at the same time. How do I post a video and then clarify in another room, on Zoom? How do I get enough information so I'm not getting to the point where our kids were opening, Google platforms in the morning and going, oh my gosh, what do I do? So where Rob was talking about office hours as a vehicle for executive functioning, the special ed teachers were thinking about, how do you teach? What do you do in the morning when you click in first and you see it all so you don't shut down? So I think we came out of that saying, we need to do more professional development. We need to learn more engaging ways of sustaining kids' attention in these platforms, because we don't know. We've gotten better at it, but there's lots of people that know, more than we do. And we're starting to really study the value and potential benefits of teleassessment. We do lots of standardized tests. We haven't been able to do those. They're prescribed for very controlled environments, controlled materials, but there are some things you can do validly online, and we have to learn what's valid and what isn't valid to do. I certainly feel strongly that we've been right not to assess kids in the middle of a pandemic. But when we talk about opening for school, we have to really start saying, okay, academics, there's so much that's going on with general education that we build on in special education, and the teams working together, we'll figure out what kids need to be shored up on, what needs to be retaught, and what kind of service supports need to change. But when we talk about mental health, that's another whole avenue and almost more compelling point, because this is the first time in our community where when those school doors open, every single individual that walks in those doors, adults or children, walk in as individuals that have survived a pandemic. And that impact is similar to having experienced trauma. So we formed under, Dr. Schaap's advisement, formed a district-wide crisis team. And at the beginning of the pandemic, we thought, oh my gosh, what are we going to do, right? If someone dies, quite honestly. And we talked about that. The committee is composed of, I should go back to administrators, several administrators, a mental health representative from every level and every building, psychologists, social workers, and outside agencies, Bereavement Center of Westchester, Friends of the Family, Larchmont Mamaroneck Community Counseling. So we started there, and then we said, okay, but there's more we need to think about. How are we going to figure out what our adults and students need? Because adults need to be healthy and prepared to support kids and families, quite honestly. So we've been talking weekly about ways to start to assess not only the certainly the ongoing housing and food insecurity needs of our community, but also in terms of kids, how are we going to know over the summer how they're doing, how they're feeling, what their anxieties are, what outside groups can offer social connections and supports. When we start to talk about entering the school building, how do we prepare teachers with the dialogue and the knowledge and the skills to sit with students and honor their feelings about what it's like to be back, and notice vulnerability in a way that we've never had to recognize it before. So, how are we going to do that? We're actually looking at survey tools. We're looking at doing more forums. I've been doing some forums with Larchmont Mamaroneck Community Counseling for parents. We're looking at bringing parent groups together and talking to them about how kids are doing. But most importantly, the committee has given Bob Schaap's a list of considerations for school opening as well. How should the middle school open? How many people should be there on that first day to welcome kids? And how do we build community and unity in a way that we haven't had to do before? So we're looking, we've attended lots of virtual conferences, quite honestly, on trauma and impact of COVID. And we'll be, trying to figure out also and working with guidance on how do we teach kids? There's a new way of taking good care of your friends now. That's
you.
completely different than
Bob,
before.
Bob,
Thank
can I
you.
just-
Yes, I wanted to have Paul turn to you because I wanted to say,
Yeah.
build off of that from the board's perspective and your perspective as a parent about what is necessary thinking about planning. And then I can touch on at least what's well underway through the process.
Yeah, well, I think Norm made an incredible point about a couple of things. Number one, the resources that were going to be necessary come the fall. The board has talked about these at all of our meetings. The importance of the flexibility to have things in place for the mental, academic, and physical well-being of all the children that are coming to school in September, because we don't know what that's going to look like. I think the other important aspect of the communication process that Nora was talking about is consistent communication. I think it's important that we are consistent with how we communicate with the community about understanding and evaluating how they're feeling and relate to how they're feeling. We're all parents, we understand, we understand that, but I think it's important that the district communicate with our community members to make sure that we understand and that we're doing all we can to help them moving forward. I think that's a really important, consistent message that people need to hear in this time, especially in this time of crisis, because people are looking for reassurances. And I think that's a real important aspect. I know we've communicated, but I think being consistent is the key to that. And also the other important part is the PTAs. I think the PTA should get an important shout out here because they play such an important role in the linkage between the administration, the board, and also the community. They all are heavily involved, obviously, with the school, do an amazing job. But they also talk with people on a consistent basis, have regular conversations with community members, and leveraging them and using them to help that communication, but also understand what's actually going on in the community is very important moving forward. So I think those are three big aspects that we should obviously take a good look at and continue to excel in those areas. So those are my thoughts briefly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And so if I could just say, maybe to segue, to build off of that, we have begun the process of collaborating with Stanford University's Design Lab School to plan or begin the process of really thinking about the likely scenarios for the fall. And there are a number of parallel processes that are underway. And I think the questions that several parents presented today is, to what extent is the district moving forward with planning? When will we know? And to build on your question or statement, Paul, about how do we communicate? And then what will it look like? And I think I want to touch on that and maybe ask some of our panelists to comment as well. We do know that it's more than likely that we need to develop plans and prototypes and operationalize the idea of an open campus with working under public health restrictions, the possibility of a hybrid model, and extended remote learning. And so we have about 75 stakeholders, when I say that, students, parents, administrators, and a large group of teachers who have organized around 3 working groups, elementary, middle, and high school, working with the D-Labs facilitators to really start out thinking about the future in a very broad way, but operationalizing that thought process to build narratives about what we believe will happen in the fall. The goal there in mind is to really have multiple perspectives from a design thinking vantage point to understand the needs of students, the needs of teachers, the needs of parents as critical partners, so that we can develop and execute plans for the fall. The difficulty is there's several things that we know. We know right now that the governor has said that we will have guidelines on reopening. They have not been published. We expect them during the month of June, but there's a lot of questions as to what they will look like and what they will entail. We also know that where we have a starting date for school, we don't know when we have to submit our plans and how those plans were reviewed and what the responsibilities and requirements will be overall. And that unknown is a challenge as well. But what we can say is that we are well underway of really looking both globally and locally around best practices and thinking how we can take a middle school with close to 1,300 students and a large staff and build models for the 3 likely scenarios. How do we understand the possibility that some students won't be able to attend the school based on health considerations, and what would remote learning look like throughout the year, and so on and so forth. So we've launched this work. This will continue through the first 10 days of June, and we hope to end up with described identifiable plans for each of the scenarios. Then the work then becomes is really rolling up our sleeves and really developing schedules, looking at health and safety, looking at well-being practices, understanding the role of the teacher, development of professional development to build capacity, and all that's underway. And it's important to note that simultaneous to that, that we are doing other things to plan effectively for the fall. We have worked in contract with our architectural firm to evaluate the square footage of our facilities, to look and understand under guidelines for social distancing, how many students can fit within a particular classroom across the system. How can we repurpose large school areas and look at outdoor spaces at schools to provide instruction and what that will take going forward. We are looking at technology in terms of investing in technology and platforms and evaluating learning platforms to strengthen delivery of remote or a hybrid learning. We're trying to understand the impact of transportation, food service, and so on. So all of this is well underway. And the goal is to continue to, as Paul, to your statement, provide ongoing communications, but also bring people into the process so that there is some good feedback from stakeholders, from parents, and we can take advantage of what people know, what people are concerned about, and strengthen our resolve to deliver what I call a opening, not reopening, for the fall when that should happen. So all of this is well underway, and there's so many layers to it. And I think it's going to take a collaborative effort, but also the buy-in and trust of our parents going forward. So that really is kind of an update as to where we are. I think now maybe what I could say is really asking our Hommocks team to talk about the nitty-gritty, that is the specifics. So how will sixth graders moving into seventh grade understand the schedule and organize things? What is the status of Dos Caminos for next year? How will incoming fifth graders feel and get to know the school as we think about the start of school? So I want to transition back based on those comments. So let's maybe start Dos Caminos. I know there's been a lot of planning discussion, and I know we can have a separate meeting to kind of give a full version of what is happening and thinking around Dos Caminos. Because one of the questions is Dos Caminos, will there be Dos Caminos or dual language middle school program next year?
We are excited that we are going to continue with Dos Caminos next year. We've had a very successful year with our current students, and we look forward to welcoming the new batch of students.
Great, thank you. And then in terms of planning just the schedule, Rob, thinking about the priorities around transition back, any additional comments on that?
I noticed Tim Nelson is on a green screen right now, but Tim's my partner in this work, as well as Margaret and Minnie. We have to plan for a full opening, because that's what a master schedule is. It's where everyone in a building goes, and we're full steam ahead. But what's been very exciting, actually, about this remote space, even thinking about schedule, is the way that teachers from different disciplines have been able to communicate with each other. So I want to take this opportunity to really acknowledge our unified arts teachers, our music teachers, our physical education teachers, who have made critical connections with our core teachers in order to make students succeed. So, for our incoming sixth graders who are planning to be part of a musical ensemble, it's going to happen, and it's going to happen beautifully. Our teachers have created virtual spaces for kids to play, practice, and appreciate music together. We have our incredible family and consumer sciences teachers who have connected. This is just a very short story. A student who had been struggling to finish his work connected with Betty Comerford, one of our rock star family and consumer sciences teachers, and he sent her a picture of 2 fried eggs. And he said, "This is the only thing that I've been really proud of over the last 2 days." She sent that picture to all of his core teachers, who said he hasn't done any work for a few weeks. They talked about the fried eggs, and he's completely turned around his remote learning experience and is producing work. So when we talk about schedule, we're really talking about sort of the mosaic that is Hommocks. That is a group of dedicated core teachers, but also a huge core of unified arts, music, and PE teachers who are sort of chomping at the bit to start their practices with sixth graders next year.
Thank you. And when we think about the needs, and I know you mentioned it, Nora, about how we'll manage to deliver support for students under special education or IEPs, as we think about this transition, what are maybe the salient points that come to mind?
Well, so I'll start in the easiest part, which is if we're back in the building, which is what we hope. But if we're actually back in the building, what parents can expect, this actually applies to both. It's a better way to start. So because all the kids will have been scheduled by Rob's magic scheduling, getting everybody in the right place, each child will have a contact teacher, so to speak, and that will be the special ed teacher that will take the primary, responsibility over their services, along with the psychologist and the guidance counselor. That contact teacher will be in touch with parents before school begins. Maria Albano, who's the department chair for special ed at the Hommocks, will make sure that the department is starting to think about how do we connect kids to teachers prior to coming to school, so that if they get to school physically, they know who they're looking for, because before that we'd bring kids in. If we're in a hybrid environment, that's going to take a level of thinking and through that will be, I'm not prepared to speak to, quite honestly, because we'll have to determine who, when, and to what degree. There are kids with significant disabilities that can't access remote learning like others can. So we're going to have to really look at it very carefully, and again, always overlaying it to what's going on, to make the best decisions in an individualized manner for kids. But we'll communicate it, and I will send an update to parents as I did earlier in this.
I wanted to thank you. First of all, thank you. I wanted to just comment. There's a question that came in about summer programs, and we're in the process of investigating the potential or the possibility of developing some summer courses. We're mindful of the upcoming budget vote on June 9th, and the need in some ways to balance what we can offer based on where we are with the budget and the uncertainty of the state's financial position. That said, we do see the value of thinking about constructing and offering short courses or mini courses that may touch on and support students re-entering in the fall. And so we have an initiative looking at access to Regents math, algebra in 8th grade, and looking at how we can support students. And so there'll be more to come on that possibility, and our thinking about how do we provide additional enrichment and engaging opportunities for students both at the middle school and the high school, knowing that we are not going to have the traditional, what I would say, summer school program at the high school, but we see an opportunity to provide something to a range of students going forward. That is important. It is on our minds, and just trying to make sure that I respond to all.
Dr. Shaps, could I just add to that about extended school year services? For kids whose IEPs recommend extended school year services, those will be virtual. Parents will be contacted by one of our directors of special education, Jennifer Monaco, next week, if not before, via letter describing the program. But suffice it to say, it will be about it will be 2 hours of synchronous instruction daily during the 6 weeks. So again, teachers will be in touch with parents, and you will hear more, but that's for students who have it on their IEPs because of the significance of their disability.
So just to kind of summarize and wrap up, when we think about the 6th grade transition, because I know that it is a significant moment for the coming together of all our 5th graders in the system. Maybe Margaret, you can talk about what we're thinking about to kind of make that a smooth transition. I know we've touched on it. Tim mentioned about the work that's now the communication around organizing the teams, placement with students. But in general, what would you say is our priorities around that first opening and first moment in school for 6th grade? Because I know that is certainly represented by a number of questions that came in by parents this evening.
And I hope we have a lot of our new 6th grade parents listening tonight. We can't wait to build community and connections with all of you and with your children. So, I mean, I have to say that when we met with Dr. Sacchi for the first time, the first question he asked me is, what are we going to do for our incoming 6th graders? It was the first conversation we had. It's something that's on all of our minds. And one of the pillars of our values at Hommocks is that all kids feel they belong and they feel part of the Hommocks community. So that's our guiding principle when we think about our new students coming into the building. So if we're in the building in the fall, we've got this. We know we'll spend the first week welcoming kids, team building within teams with the whole community. That's something that we've built over the last couple of years. If we're not in the building, we're going to make it a priority to make sure that teachers know who their students are well in advance of the beginning of school so they can reach out to kids, they can get kids together. Many teachers have been experimenting with this over the past 11 weeks of ways to get kids together socially. Teams have their own Google Classrooms, they have trivia nights and all sorts of things. So our teachers are already getting really good at different ways to bring kids together in a community in the remote. So it's definitely something we don't have a solid plan now, but it's something that we're thinking about and talking about all the time. We know that it's a priority that our 6th graders really feel that they're welcome this summer and that they feel ready to come back to school.
I can just add
Can I add one thing? I'm
Sure.
sorry. I hope you can hear me. I turned green for some reason. I'm not sure why that is. Just to piggyback on what Margaret said, I think it's important to point out that it really is a transition for all, students in particular, but, with parents and learning how to support, their children in middle school. It's already a transition, but coming back in,